The courtroom laughed. Not everyone, but just enough for her to hear it echo. The clerk shifted in her seat. A man in the second row smirked. And the judge? The judge chuckled. But, careless. All because when Jasmine Pierce opened her mouth, her voice didn't sound like theirs. Her English was fluent, professional, precise. But her southern drawl wrapped around each word like history, rich, lived in, unapologetic. You say you're a lawyer? The judge repeated, still amused. You're gonna have to do better than that. The laughter tickled the air again, this time like a slap. But Jasmine didn't blink. She reached into her bag, slowly, unzipped the leather folder, and when she laid the document on the bench, the laughter stopped. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Not a call. Not an email. Just a thick manila envelope stamped second notice in bright red ink. Inside, a court summons. A property dispute. Filed against her. Plaintiff, East Ridge Neighborhood Association. Defendant, Jasmine Pierce. Hearing date, October 3rd. Charge, illegal property use, subdivision violation. Her eyes scanned the pages 3 times. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. She owned her home. She paid her dues. She followed every rule, sometimes too closely. But in the back of her throat, a familiar heaviness started forming. She'd felt it before. At job interviews. In faculty meetings. When her daughter came home crying from school. This wasn't about property lines. It was about perception. Jasmine Pierce was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. The daughter of 2 schoolteachers. She earned her law degree at Emory University. Graduated with honors. Worked in housing advocacy, civil rights litigation, and opened her own nonprofit legal center for low-income tenants. She'd represented hundreds. She'd argued in federal court. She had credentials few in her county could match. But here, in the suburban bubble of East Ridge Estates, she was just that woman in the ranch style with the porch chairs. The one with big hoop earrings. The one who played old jazz from her speakers on Sunday mornings. The one whose daughter, Layla, wore bright head wraps and sneakers to school. Now, she was the one who needed to be reminded where she stood. East Ridge was the kind of place that bragged about quiet living and traditional values. Perfect lawns. White fences. Identical American flags, flown without wrinkle. Jasmine followed the rules. But last spring, she'd built a raised bed behind her house. Laid compost. Planted kale. Tomatoes. Herbs. Nothing visible from the road. But someone had seen it. And filed a complaint. The official letter claimed she had altered land use, without HOA approval. That her garden was agricultural and therefore out of compliance. She laughed. Agricultural? It was a 6-foot garden box. Tomatoes and greens. But then she saw the fine, $1,300. And the enforcement date, 30 days. She came to the next HOA meeting in a navy suit. Minimal makeup. Folders full of documentation. She cited code. Showed photos of similar setups. But the board didn't care. One man scrolled on his phone. Another whispered to someone behind him. The president, Harold Kingsley, smiled condescendingly. We've got rules for a reason. Others have citrus trees, she reminded. But they're not growing food. Yours implies intention. So citrus is allowed but kale isn't? Ma'am, he said, slower. Just take it down. She didn't take it down. She filed her own legal motion. With citations. Photos. Testimonies. She was ready to argue. What she wasn't ready for was the disrespect. October 3rd. Jasmine wore gray. Carried only what she needed. No entourage. Just her and her daughter sitting in the back. The judge, tall, pale, jowled, didn't look up right away. Across the aisle, Harold Kingsley sat smug with a second board member. The room was quiet, but charged. When her name was called, Jasmine stood tall. Good morning, Your Honor. Jasmine Pierce, representing myself. Then the snicker. Then the laughter. You say you're a lawyer? You're gonna have to do better than that. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She just unzipped her folder. And laid the one document on the bench that would change everything. The folder made a soft sound as it opened, a whisper of leather and papers sliding free. No one in the courtroom moved. No one breathed too loudly. Even the smirks seemed to pause. Jasmine Pierce placed the document gently on the bench, then looked up at the judge. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "before this hearing proceeds, I ask the court to acknowledge this motion for immediate dismissal under Article 3, Section 9B of the Georgia Residential Protection Act." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The document spoke louder than anyone in that room had so far. The judge blinked, leaned forward, and adjusted his glasses. "Dismissal?" he asked, suddenly serious. Jasmine nodded. "On the grounds that the Homeowners Association's claim directly violates state law prohibiting discriminatory enforcement of subdivision guidelines. This garden bed," she gestured calmly, "is in full compliance with zoning code and does not fall under HOA jurisdiction based on precedents set in Wilson v. Greenbrier Estates and Moreno v. Crestline HOA." The clerk shifted in her seat. The HOA's lawyer, a young man who hadn't spoken yet, looked visibly rattled. He began shuffling his papers, flipping through his notes like the answer might be buried there. Harold Kingsley, seated beside him, leaned over and muttered, "What is she talking about?" Jasmine heard it. She looked directly at Kingsley. "I'm talking," she said, "about the law you thought I wouldn't know." The motion she had just handed over wasn't something she had downloaded from the internet or copied from a template. She wrote it herself, all 16 pages. It contained photographic exhibits, references to local case law, and highlighted excerpts from the East Ridge HOA handbook, specifically the parts the board routinely ignored when targeting residents who didn't blend in. She included screenshots from past newsletters where other homeowners were praised for their citrus trees and backyard orchards. She had even included a notarized affidavit from a retired HOA president confirming the selective enforcement of gardening rules in East Ridge. And at the end of it, a personal letter from Jasmine, explaining why this wasn't just about tomatoes. It was about voice, and presence, and place. The judge read in silence for several minutes. The courtroom sat in still tension. Then he cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "who was not aware of these details?" Jasmine tilted her head. "That's why I brought them to you." The clerk looked up from her screen and glanced at Jasmine, not with amusement this time, but something closer to admiration. The judge leaned back. "Mr. Kingsley," he said, turning toward the HOA side, "is your association aware that your enforcement of land use violations has targeted residents inconsistently?" Harold's mouth opened, then closed. Their attorney stammered. "We'll need time to review these documents." "You had time," Jasmine cut in, her voice still even. "You just didn't expect I'd use mine to defend myself." For the first time since she entered that courtroom, Jasmine wasn't defending. She was leading. She could feel it in the way the clerk now looked at her with steady eyes. In the way the judge's tone had shifted from condescension to caution. And in the way Harold Kingsley, the man who had rolled his eyes at her in a dozen HOA meetings, now sat fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve like a child waiting to be scolded. Jasmine's daughter, Layla, sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. But when Jasmine glanced her way, the girl smiled, not big but wide enough. Because even at 10 years old, Layla knew what was happening. She knew what it meant to have a voice and use it, even when people tried to shrink it. Especially then. After a pause, the judge sighed. "I'm going to take a recess to review the motion and the exhibits," he said, tapping the papers. "But I'll be candid, this is more thorough than many filings I've seen this month." He looked at Jasmine again, this time as if he was seeing her for the first time. "You really are an attorney." She nodded once. "Yes, I really am." He stood. 15-minute recess. "When we return, I'll issue a ruling." In the hallway, Jasmine stepped outside for air. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't relieved. She was centered. A woman approached her, one of the audience members. Older, white hair, cautious voice. I wanted to say thank you. For not letting them walk over you." Jasmine nodded. "We all deserve to stand where we belong." The judge returned with none of the smug detachment he'd worn earlier. His robe rustled as he took his seat. The room, once charged with mockery and condescension, now buzzed with unease. Jasmine sat still at the defendant's table, hands folded over her notes. She didn't need to review them again. She'd already lived every line. Layla met her mother's eyes from the back row and nodded. The judge cleared his throat. In the matter of East Ridge Neighborhood Association versus Jasmine Pierce, he began, I've reviewed the motion to dismiss filed by the defendant, as well as the supporting documents. He paused. Frankly, this court is concerned by what's in front of it. Harold Kingsley sat ramrod straight, gripping his armrest. The HOA attorney, now visibly sweating, tried to maintain composure. The court finds that the enforcement of subdivision guidelines by the plaintiff appears not only inconsistent, but likely discriminatory in nature. A gasp escaped from somewhere behind Jasmine. The judge went on. This garden bed does not constitute agricultural use as defined by Georgia's zoning code. Furthermore, Exhibit 5 shows that other residents have planted lemon trees and berry bushes with no action taken against them. The selective enforcement demonstrated here undermines the legitimacy of the HOA's authority. He looked over the rim of his glasses at Kingsley. Mr. Kingsley, care to explain that? Harold opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. The judge didn't wait. Motion to dismiss, granted. The gavel dropped with finality. And I am referring this case to the Office of Civil Rights for review. This court recommends an audit of East Ridge Estates HOA's enforcement history for potential patterns of bias. Silence fell like a curtain. Jasmine exhaled slowly. Not relief. Validation. Outside the courtroom, sunlight filtered through high windows, sharp and white. People filed out with quiet murmurs. A few nodded in Jasmine's direction. One woman squeezed her arm gently as she passed. Kingsley brushed past without meeting her gaze. Layla ran up and wrapped her arms around Jasmine's waist. You did it, she whispered. We did, Jasmine replied. We made them see. 2 days later, Jasmine received a call from a reporter with the Atlanta Daily Tribune. I sat in the courtroom, the reporter said. I've never seen a judge reverse tone that fast. She asked Jasmine for a statement. Jasmine hesitated. She wasn't interested in attention. She hadn't fought for a headline. But then she remembered the older woman in the hallway. The look in her eyes. The quiet thank you. She gave the interview. Spoke not just about her case, but about every neighbor who couldn't afford to speak up. About the selective citations. The quiet erasures. The exhausting performance of compliance. This wasn't about a garden, she told the reporter. It was about who gets to feel at home. By the end of the week, the story had picked up steam. Blogs reposted it. Advocacy groups shared it. People across the state started checking their HOA handbooks more closely. The headline on one article read, HOA cop gets schooled, how one woman turned the tables in court. But it wasn't the headlines Jasmine cared about. It was the emails. One came from a veteran in South Carolina, fined for building a wheelchair ramp for his wife without approval. Another from a single mother in Arizona, who'd been cited for having too many flower pots on her front steps. One note simply read, Thank you. I thought I was crazy. I thought it was just me. 2 weeks later, Jasmine received a formal invitation to speak at a community equity summit in Atlanta. Topic: homeownership, race, and regulation. Who gets to belong? She accepted. She didn't prepare slides. She prepared stories. The East Ridge HOA quietly updated their website. The clause regarding non-ornamental plants disappeared. They stopped issuing fines for garden beds altogether. No apology. No public acknowledgement. But change doesn't always come with a ribbon. Sometimes it comes in silence. In the way someone chooses not to push next time. Spring arrived early the next year. Jasmine expanded her garden, not out of defiance, but celebration. Tomatoes, sweet potatoes, basil, and for Layla, a row of sunflowers taller than she was. Neighbors began stopping by, asking for compost tips, borrowing tools. One elderly couple asked if Jasmine could help them start a garden of their own. She smiled. Of course, she said. We've got space to grow. The ruling had been made. The case dismissed. The HOA silenced. But the real change hadn't begun yet. It began in whispers. It was a week after the hearing when Jasmine heard it, a soft, hesitant knock. She opened the door to find Mrs. Rosaline Hardy, a woman she'd only seen from afar. Gray hair, perfect lawn, pearls always at her throat. She stood on Jasmine's porch like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "I hope this isn't strange," she said, clutching a folded envelope. "I just wanted to say thank you." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Hardy continued. "My husband built our porch ramp without board approval when I got sick. They fined us. $900. He paid it so we wouldn't draw attention." Her voice cracked. "But I read about your case. And I realized we never should have stayed quiet." She held out the envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter. "Your voice helped me find mine." Jasmine had expected quiet resentment. Avoided eye contact. Passive-aggressive stares. But instead, neighbors began waving, asking questions. One even asked if she offered legal consultations for small HOA matters, nothing big. The same people who once looked right past her, now they were seeing her. Not as a disruption, as something rooted. 2 weeks later, Jasmine attended a PTA meeting at Layla's elementary school. Near the end, a mother stood up and asked if she could speak. It was Leah Williams, a young single mom who worked night shifts at the hospital. She told a short story about how she'd been warned by her apartment board that her wind chimes were culturally inappropriate. "They told me they make too much noise," Leah said, her voice tight. "But I never once heard them complain about Christmas music coming through walls." She paused. Jasmine's story made me realize I wasn't imagining it. I was just expected to stay quiet. Heads nodded around the room. One parent clapped. Then another. It spread. Like a seed taking root. That spring, something odd started happening across East Ridge. Tiny flower beds appeared in places they'd never been. Bright tulips beside mailbox posts. Native shrubs under kitchen windows. A row of cabbages planted, deliberately, in view of the HOA office. No one asked for approval. They just grew. Not because of rebellion. Because of invitation. Jasmine had never told anyone what to plant. She'd simply shown that they could. A month later, Jasmine returned to the courthouse, but not as a defendant. This time, she was sitting behind another woman. A retired postal worker named Bernice. The HOA had cited her for placing a homemade bench near her front garden. Jasmine wasn't representing her, but she'd helped her draft her filing. Walked her through what to expect. And when the judge ruled in Bernice's favor, Jasmine watched the woman lean back with tears in her eyes and whisper, "They can't erase us. Not if we show up." At home, Layla had started drawing more. One day she brought home a poster for a class project titled, "Things That Grow Even When You Say They Shouldn't." She had drawn the tomato plant in a cracked pot, a row of houses with different colored shutters, and a woman, Jasmine, standing tall, holding a watering can. Beneath it, Layla had written, "My mom taught me that some people try to cut you down. But if your roots are deep, you rise back up anyway." The East Ridge HOA board held elections that summer. For the first time, more than 2 residents ran for open seats. People asked Jasmine if she would run. She declined. But she nominated someone else, a neighbor named Danielle who had been too nervous to attend meetings 6 months ago. Danielle won by a landslide. And at the first meeting she chaired, she proposed a community garden open to all. It passed 4-1. The lone no? Harold Kingsley, who resigned the next week. One evening, Jasmine sat in her backyard watching Layla harvest tomatoes. The sun dipped low behind the house, casting long shadows and soft gold across the fence line. She thought about what had changed. Yes, the ruling mattered. But the real shift? It was watching people realize they didn't have to wait for permission to belong. She thought of Mrs. Hardy's letter. Leah's wind chimes. Bernice's bench. Layla's poster. And she realized her voice hadn't just stopped one injustice. It had cleared space for dozens more to speak. You don't always hear the moment the world changes. Sometimes it sounds like soil being turned. A child asking a question. A neighbor pausing mid-step to wave where they wouldn't have before. Jasmine never set out to be a symbol. But symbols don't ask for permission. They emerge when silence is finally cracked open. And the crack was widening. The city called it a Community Voices Forum. But everyone in East Ridge knew why it was happening. For the first time, residents could speak publicly, on record, about HOA practices, local discrimination, and housing equity. Jasmine was invited as a panelist. Not as a lawyer. Not even as a plaintiff. Just as a neighbor who stood up when others stayed seated. She arrived early, wearing denim and a soft blue blouse. She didn't want to look like a politician. Because she wasn't one. She was a mother. A gardener. A woman who'd had enough. Midway through the evening, a man named Carl took the mic. A warehouse worker. Lived on the west side of East Ridge. Had never spoken at a town forum before. They fined me last year for having a tarp over my grill, he said. Said it was visual clutter. But my neighbors got a whole inflatable Santa in June and nobody says a thing. Laughter. Murmurs. It's not the rules that are broken, he said. It's who they're aimed at. Then he looked straight at Jasmine. She reminded me I ain't crazy for feeling what I feel. He got a standing ovation. The city council approved a pilot program called Roots of Belonging. It offered grants for residents to start microgardens, regardless of HOA restrictions, provided there was no structural hazard. Jasmine wasn't part of the planning committee. But every time they mentioned the idea, her name was there. People whispered it like a kind of thanks. Like rainwater on dry ground. Jasmine began receiving letters. Some typed, some handwritten. One came from a teacher in Memphis. My students did a debate project on housing rights. One of them quoted your courtroom case. You're in the curriculum now. Another from an elderly man in Delaware. I've lived through so much. But watching what you did made me feel like I'm still here for a reason. She kept every letter. Taped them in a notebook. Called it her root book. At school, Layla's class was asked to write about someone they admired. She didn't choose a celebrity. She didn't pick a scientist or inventor. She picked her mom. In shaky handwriting, Layla wrote, "My mama taught me that laws are just paper if you don't stand in front of them. But when you do, they mean something." Jasmine cried when she read it. Not because she felt proud, but because she realized Layla had been listening all along. 3 months after her own trial, Jasmine got a call from a woman named Tanya in a neighboring county. Her HOA had cited her for installing motion lights, said they disrupted visual harmony. Jasmine reviewed the documents. Read the handbook. It was thinly veiled profiling. She didn't hesitate. "I'll help," she said. "No fee." This time Jasmine wasn't the defendant. She was sitting beside Tanya, briefing her before the hearing. Same system. Same language. But this time, Jasmine watched from the other side of the table. Tanya spoke clearly. Presented her motion. Quoted Jasmine's case. The judge dismissed the HOA's claim in 8 minutes. When it was over, Tanya turned to her and whispered, "You gave me the words." Jasmine smiled. "They were already yours. I just reminded you they matter." Later that summer, an artist painted a mural on the side of the local library. It featured 3 women of different races, ages, and styles, standing in a field of wildflowers, each holding a legal document like a seed. Above them, in bold yellow script, "Grow anyway." Someone told Jasmine she was the inspiration for the middle figure. She visited it once. Didn't take a selfie. Just stood there and let it speak. One humid night, the neighborhood lost electricity. Transformer issue. Jasmine brought candles to the porch. Layla brought snacks. Soon, 3 neighbors showed up with chairs. They sat in the dark. Shared stories. Someone played music from a phone speaker. Another read a poem. It felt free. Not flashy. Not forced. Just real. And in that quiet, Jasmine realized something. She hadn't won anything. She'd simply stopped asking to exist quietly. And in doing that, she'd helped others speak, plant, question, bloom. Not because she told them to. Because she showed them it was possible. It started as a whisper. A quiet idea planted between sentences, like a seed waiting for the right season. Wouldn't it be beautiful, someone said at a community meeting, if we made a space for people to just sit? A bench where you know you belong. The idea lingered. Not loud, but sticky. Like jasmine on summer air. Jasmine didn't propose it. She simply nodded when it was mentioned. And when someone asked if they could name it after her, she gently shook her head. Not mine, she said. Ours. So it became a group effort. Neighbors pitched in. One donated cedar planks. Another offered sealant. A teenage boy with braces and quiet eyes carved the nameplate. Layla helped choose the location, beneath a shady oak near the entrance of East Ridge Park. Not the flashiest spot, but the most seen. The place where everyone walked by, to school, to the store, to Sunday morning runs. They debated names for 2 days. The justice seat. The bench of change. The voice rest. In the end, it was a second grader named Faith who said the phrase that stuck. It should be called the bench where they belong. Because that's how my mom felt after your garden story. Everyone went silent. Jasmine smiled. That was it. It wasn't an official ceremony. No ribbon cutting. No press. Just neighbors. A few kids. A tray of lemonade. And a shared silence as the bench was set into place. It was beautiful. Dark wood. Smooth lines. A brass plaque that read, "The bench where they belong." For every voice that fought to be heard, and every root that held firm. Jasmine sat on it first. Not because she asked to, but because everyone else waited for her to. She didn't speak. She just breathed. And in that breath was everything that had come before. The courtroom. The file folder. The laughter. The silence after. A week later, Jasmine passed by and saw an elderly man sitting on the bench with his granddaughter, reading her a book. Another day, 2 teenagers sat there with sketch pads, headphones on, drawing in companionable silence. One evening, a woman in scrubs sat there crying softly, wiping her eyes, whispering to herself. No one disturbed her. That's what the bench had become. Not a monument. A mirror. A reminder that people deserve to be there, even when no one invited them. Jasmine received an envelope in the mail with no return address, postmarked from Tennessee. Inside was a folded photo. It was of a bench. Painted lavender. Carved by hand. Set near a community garden. Taped to the back was a note. We started our own. You made us believe we could. She added it to her root book. Page 53. One late summer afternoon, Jasmine returned to the bench to sit with Layla. They shared watermelon slices wrapped in foil. Watched birds. Listened to wind. Mom, Layla said, do you think benches can make people kinder? Jasmine considered it. I think they give people space to remember who they are. Like you did. She smiled. Like we did. Layla beamed. Can I paint one someday? You'll build one. One day, Jasmine walked by the bench and saw a man standing in front of it, hands in his pockets. It was Harold Kingsley, the former HOA board president. He didn't sit. Just stared. When Jasmine approached, he turned slowly. I came to see what all the noise was about, he said, almost joking. She raised an eyebrow. It's a quiet bench. He nodded. That's the thing. It's loud without saying a word. 'Cause I was wrong, you know. Jasmine didn't rescue him with comfort. She let the silence stretch. I didn't see it then. But I see it now. Good, she said. That's where change starts. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And she didn't offer it. But they shared the bench that day. 2 people. A long shadow. And the sound of belonging finding its shape. It began with a spark. Not a literal fire, not yet. But something was smoldering. The bench had become too visible. Too beloved. Too symbolic. And for people who built their power on silence, symbols like that were dangerous. The first sign came on a Wednesday morning. Jasmine walked by the bench, same as always, coffee in hand. There was a note pinned to the backrest with a thumbtack. Plain paper. Typed in block font. Community installations without approval will be removed. East Ridge Property Compliance Task Force. There was no signature. No contact number. But everyone knew who it came from. A month after Jasmine's courtroom victory, The HOA rebranded part of its enforcement team into something called the Property Compliance Task Force. On paper, it was supposed to monitor neighborhood aesthetics and uniformity. In practice, it became a way to sidestep the optics of targeting individual voices, while still dismantling what they stood for. They didn't go after people directly. They went after what represented them. And the bench? That was target number one. One morning, Jasmine arrived to find the bench had been graffitied. Crude red spray paint across the plaque. Go back to court. Layla was with her. She froze. Sir. Jasmine walked up quietly and knelt beside the bench. Pulled a rag from her tote. No words. Just cleaning. Neighbors saw. One came out with gloves. Another brought a can of sealant. Someone offered to sand and restain the wood. By sundown, the bench looked better than before. But the message lingered in the air like smoke. 3 nights later, it happened. Not a bonfire. Not a blaze. But enough. Someone lit a small fire at the base of the bench. Charred the front legs. Scorched the ground around it. Burned the edge of the plaque. It didn't destroy the bench completely. But it made a statement. They weren't just annoyed. They were afraid. By morning, the photo had gone viral in the neighborhood group. Jasmine posted it herself. No anger. No accusation. Just a caption. We can rebuild benches. But we shouldn't have to. The post exploded. Dozens of comments. People offering supplies. Labor. Donations. One message read, "They thought fire would scare us. But they forgot, fire also forges steel." It didn't take long for the media to catch on. Local outlets arrived first. Then regional. Even a national blog ran a headline. From Courtroom to kindling. The movement they tried to burn. Reporters asked Jasmine how she felt. She paused before answering. Honestly? Tired. But not defeated. Then added, "You don't burn a bench unless you're losing a fight you can't admit is real." Within days, the city council passed a motion to designate the bench and park space around it as a community cultural landmark. It wouldn't just be tolerated anymore. It would be protected. The bench was repaired. The plaque replaced, same words, but now engraved deeper. 2 solar-powered lights were added to illuminate it at night. They even planted sunflowers along the path leading up to it. Layla helped dig the first hole. Jasmine began receiving anonymous messages in her mailbox. Don't get too comfortable. 1 bench down. More to go. She reported them. Police took statements. Nothing came of it. But her neighbors rallied. A retired Marine volunteered to patrol the park during weekends. Teenagers set up a live stream camera to monitor the space. One neighbor donated a small security post lamp with motion detection. One night, Jasmine sat on the repaired bench alone. The lights buzzed softly overhead. She stared out across the dark path. The trees swayed. The air smelled of scorched wood and new blooms. And she realized something. They weren't angry because she'd broken the rules. They were angry because she'd broken the pattern. She hadn't just planted a garden. She'd rooted defiance where obedience used to live. And every time someone else found the courage to speak, paint, plant, or sit, they were breaking it further. The fire wasn't proof of defeat. It was proof they were being heard. The fire didn't break them. It built them. The scorched bench became a banner. The plaque, re-engraved, shone brighter than ever. And the backlash? It had revealed something crucial. Power wasn't behind the HOA's doors anymore. It was on the block. At the bus stop. On porches and front lawns and kitchen tables. All it needed now was to vote. At first, it was just Jasmine, Danielle, and Carl, the warehouse worker who spoke at the town hall. They met in Jasmine's living room with coffee, notepads, and more fire than formal structure. We've got 3 open seats on the board, Danielle said. If we take 2, we control quorum. That changes everything. Carl nodded. They're counting on folks staying tired. Let's give them a wake-up call. They didn't put up big signs. Didn't knock with scripts. They showed up with stories. Jasmine told hers, not just the courtroom, but the fire, the cleanup, the bench. Carl shared about the fines he paid just to hang flags for his son's graduation. Danielle talked about the years she stayed quiet, hoping not to be noticed. They canvassed block by block. Layla designed hand-drawn flyers with the tagline, "If they speak for you, they shouldn't be afraid of your voice." They slipped them under doors, taped them to mailboxes, handed them out at the local grocery. Harold Kingsley may have resigned, but the old guard hadn't disappeared. A candidate named Philip Grant emerged, a quiet man with a clipped tone, known for reminding kids to stay off the sidewalk and filing nuisance reports over minor yard clutter. His platform? Restoring order and quiet pride to East Ridge. His flyers featured manicured lawns and smiling white families. But behind closed doors, his supporters stirred fear. Do we really want people turning this place into an activist hub? It's a neighborhood, not a platform. Next thing you know, we'll be painted as the ones in the wrong. The HOA hosted a candidate forum 3 days before the election. Turnout doubled from the previous year. Jasmine stood in a navy blouse, hair natural, voice unwavering. When asked what she'd change, she said, "Not everything. Just enough to make sure you don't need a lawyer to plant kale." The room chuckled. Then she added, "And to remind this board that leadership means listening, not managing." Philip followed with vague promises about preserving tradition and avoiding spectacle. But it didn't land the same way anymore. Not in a room full of people who had stood beside a burned bench. There was no school that day, but Layla woke up early. She helped set up coffee at the polling station, handed out granola bars to neighbors in line, wore a shirt Jasmine hadn't seen before. Grow anyway. By noon, turnout had already surpassed the last 3 years combined. By 4 p.m., Danielle's phone lit up with texts from precinct volunteers. Turnout is massive. Saw people who haven't voted in a decade. We might actually pull this off. That night, Jasmine didn't host a watch party. She sat with Layla on the porch, phone on silent, waiting. At 8:43 p.m., Carl called. "We got 2 seats. Ours. Ours." Jasmine didn't shout, didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and breathed. For every bench, every fine, every "you don't belong." Now they did. The new board meeting drew standing room only. Danielle was sworn in first. Carl second. Jasmine watched from the audience. She hadn't run. She didn't need to. The room felt different now. The usual smug faces were still there, but quiet, measured. The new board opened the floor for public comment. The first to speak? Leah, the woman with the wind chimes. "I just want to thank you all," she said, "for turning complaints into change." Applause. From there, they voted to suspend all non-safety code fines until reviewed, establish a community council for decision-making, protect all cultural installations from retroactive HOA action. It passed. Unanimously. That night, Jasmine sat beside the bench, not for ceremony, just to sit. Someone had left a small note tucked under the plaque. "You helped us remember, we have power too." She smiled, folded it, placed it in the root book, and looked up at the sky. Stars blinked quietly, like lights saying, "Still here." Movements don't always roar. Sometimes they echo. A headline, a mural, a whispered "Me too" at a backyard barbecue in a town 3 states away. Jasmine hadn't gone looking for any of it. But stories, once they grow, don't stay in their pots. They spill and root elsewhere. It came from Tulsa. A woman named Sharonda Bell. Late 30s. Single mom. Nursing student. Living in a neighborhood run by what she called a paper crown HOA. All rules, no empathy. They'd find her 3 times in 1 year. Once for a shade tent over her baby's play area. Once for leaving her recycling out 1 day late. And most recently, for unauthorized decorative displays. Translation, a Black Lives Matter banner on her porch. She didn't know Jasmine personally, but she'd watched the video of the courtroom scene, the document on the bench. "That gave me language," Sharonda said, "and I think I'm ready to fight back." Jasmine offered help. Within weeks, more messages came. A community in Charlotte started hosting bench nights, outdoor potlucks where residents shared housing experiences. A high school civics teacher in Oakland turned Jasmine's case into a semester-long mock trial project. In Detroit, a group of grandmothers organized a walkthrough of their neighborhood with laminated signs that read, "Compliance is not the same as community." One teenager even sent Jasmine a photo of her final art project, a clay sculpture of a bench with vines growing from the legs and people's names carved into the seat. By late spring, Jasmine received an email from a national podcast, American Voices. They wanted her to share her story in a special series called Women Who Changed the Law Without Holding Office. At first, she hesitated. This was never supposed to be about her. But Layla, now 11 and bolder by the day, said, "If you don't tell it, someone else will, and they won't tell it right." So she said yes. The podcast studio was quiet. The host, a woman named Alina, had kind eyes and a voice like rainfall, steady, respectful. "What was the moment you knew this was bigger than your garden?" she asked. Jasmine paused. "It wasn't the court ruling," she said. "It was the letter I got from a teacher who said her student stopped apologizing for the way her voice sounds." "Because of you? Because of all of us. I just spoke first." One night, Jasmine was going through root book letters when she found one buried beneath a stack. It was simple, scrawled in blue ink. "From a girl in Wisconsin. They told me not to wear my natural hair to school because it makes people stare. But when I saw your story, I wore it up. And one other girl wore hers too. I think that's how gardens grow." Jasmine didn't cry often anymore. But that night she did. Not because she was sad, but because it finally landed just how far a voice can travel when it's not trying to be heard, just trying to be honest. In early summer, she was invited to keynote a national housing equity summit in Washington, D.C. The lineup featured activists, lawyers, city planners, even congressional aides. Jasmine wasn't sure what she'd say. She wasn't an academic. She wasn't a politician. She was just a woman who got fined for growing food and told her voice didn't belong in a courtroom. Still, she boarded the plane. And on that stage, she stood in front of 800 people and said, "They called me disruptive. But truth isn't disruptive. It's just that comfort hides in silence. And when we speak, they hear the cracks forming." She got a standing ovation. In East Ridge, the park bench now had a sister. A new bench installed by the elementary school with a plaque that read, "For the ones still learning they belong." Layla's class had fundraised for it. Jasmine ran her fingers over the inscription one afternoon and smiled. "This was never just about land," she whispered. "It was about space." One evening, Jasmine was tending to her garden when she saw a young woman approach the gate. She wore a backpack, soft dreadlocks, nervous eyes. "Are you Miss Pierce?" "Depends who's asking." The woman laughed. "My name's Amaya. I'm studying journalism. And I just wanted to say, you're the reason I changed my major." "To journalism?" "To justice." It had been 2 years since the folder hit the bench. 2 years since the judge laughed. Since the garden fine. Since the fire. Now, the neighborhood was different. Not perfect, but aware. And Jasmine? She was no longer just the woman with the bench. She was the woman who reminded them they had a say in how the story ends. Jasmine poured coffee and stepped out onto her porch. Sunlight warmed the top of her head. The street was quiet, but alive. Birds. A sprinkler. A boy walking his dog past the bench where this all began. She smiled. Layla had already gone to school. She was in 6th grade now. Started a student council. Their platform? A voice for everyone, even the quiet kids. Jasmine couldn't help but laugh when she heard it the first time. Her daughter, the quiet storm. Still planted. Still polished. Still visited. Its plaque was touched so often, the brass had softened around the edges. Sometimes Jasmine would find notes tucked beneath it, handwritten, folded like prayers. One had read, "I didn't know how much I needed to sit here. Thank you for making space." Another, "Your voice helped me stand up at my own HO. I didn't win, but I didn't shrink either." That one stayed with her. That fall, Jasmine was invited to serve as a community advisor on the city's new Housing Equity Council. She didn't hesitate. She said yes, but not because she wanted power. Because she wanted to make sure no one had to earn the right to belong ever again. Her first proposal? Require all HOA boards to take racial bias and cultural sensitivity training as part of license renewal. It passed with a 5-2 vote. Small roots. Still growing. She hadn't set foot in that courtroom since her own case. But this time, she wasn't a defendant. She was a guest speaker. A new legal aid program was honoring grassroots legal leaders. Jasmine stood at the podium, the same wood where she'd once laid that folder. "I'm not here because I won," she told the room. "I'm here because I stayed. Because I made space." They tried to trim the truth. But the thing about truth is, even cut, it keeps growing back. Applause filled the chamber. That night, Jasmine walked barefoot across her yard. The garden had expanded. Basil. Tomatoes. A few flowers too. Sunflowers, zinnias, jasmine. She sat on the edge of the garden bed, fingers brushing the soil. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to reflect. Everything they'd thrown at her, the fines, the insults, the fire, had one goal. To make her shrink. To make her question her voice. Her accent. Her presence. Her right to take up space. But they failed. Because instead of shrinking, she rooted deeper. Instead of yelling, she grew louder through action. And instead of leaving, she stayed and made room for others. This wasn't just about a garden. This wasn't just about East Ridge. It was about a system that punishes quiet resistance. That labels dignity as disruption. Accent as incompetence. And community as chaos. But her story, your story, proves something else. You don't have to wait to be invited. You don't have to shrink to fit someone else's blueprint. You can plant your truth and let it grow where everyone can see. Jasmine never wanted to be remembered. She wanted her daughter to never question if she belonged. She wanted her neighbors to speak without whispering. She wanted benches to bloom where silence once sat. And they did. All across the country. In parks, schools, church lawns, and backyards. Each one saying, "You belong here." Fully, loudly, unapologetically. If you've ever been told your voice was too much, if your presence has ever been questioned, if you've been fined, pushed, policed, or laughed at for simply existing, this story is yours too. Don't wait to be given space. Grow anyway. This isn't just the end of Jasmine's story. It's the beginning of what you do with it. If it moved you, let it move someone else. Like this story, share it with someone finding their voice. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful, cinematic stories that shine light where silence used to live. Because stories like this, they don't just entertain, they awaken.